Alan has been, I think, within NBC since 1995 in one capacity or another, in one form or another, working on a variety of issues. He came to Washington D.C. In 1998, working on politics, and just does a great job of interviewing a wide variety of different people on a wide variety of different subjects. Always enjoy the show. Bring out insights. You challenge people without being a jerk about it. How's that for a compliment to a media person? That's, as a politician, that's, I think, the highest compliment for the media. But with this event, we always try to bring in, people from the executive branch, legislative branch, different policy folks. But I think it's always also very important to bring in the media, because they are such an important part of what we do here, how they cover stories, the information that they provide to you. And of course, the media has changed so dramatically. Certainly we still have Meet the Press, still the TV shows, but now, Twitter, Facebook, all the internet stuff is a major source of information. So the insights that are great for our media folks are both how they view the policy challenges, but then also how they view the way the media is working today, how those changes have impacted policy and impacted their job as well. So it's always great to hear that perspective, and we are honored to have David Gregory here today to give that to us from Meet the Press. Thank you for being here.
Well, good afternoon. Welcome to Washington. It's great to be here. I like to tell people that being in this job as moderator of Meet the Press, and I'm going on my 5th year, is the job of a lifetime. There's nothing I'd rather be doing, and it's changed my life in lots of ways. And the biggest way it's changed my life is with my kids' friends. So I have a 10-year-old and I have 7-year-old twins. And my son actually really doesn't think my job is very interesting, but their friends in school make a point of saying, "Oh, I see you on television." And I'm thinking, do you really watch? Is it you? Because if you are, I'm going to start changing our programming. Because some of the stuff we're talking about is frankly not suitable for your ears. But it's, anybody who works as a journalist, what we're looking for really is credibility. We want to be seen in the eyes of those who watch us or listen to us or read, what we do as being credible. And it's with the young kids that I'm finding most of this. Just the other day, a kid on my son's baseball team, he made a good play in the field, and his mother told him that. But then I made a point of saying, "Hey, Will, that was a great play in the field." And he looks at his mom and says, "See? Even he thought it was a really good play." And he says, "And he's on ABC." So it really changes things enormously. I want to pick up on something the Congressman said, because I think it's so important. I mean, right now, you kind of cut to the chase of it. Our institutions are not very highly thought of. That's Congress, that's the news media. It creates a real impediment in terms of getting things done in Washington and in other aspects of our lives. And I think that the media is both reflecting it and driving it in some ways, which is really interesting. We have this hearing that's captivated a lot of people's attention over the past couple of days. I'll be talking about on Meet the Press Sunday over Benghazi, what happened that night of 9/11, how did the administration respond to it? Are there legitimate questions? Is this all, partisan wrangling? Is it an attempt to target Hillary Clinton in 2016? All of that is true. But it's through that partisan lens that you're trying to get some real answers to legitimate questions. But the partisan lens is so wide now and is so intense, and the media narrative and the media divisions are so intense. So there's so much hate and so much venom in the media space that it really colors how we view these issues, and it really makes it very difficult. The thing about Meet the Press that is obviously a tradition and a platform that means a lot to the country, that's much bigger than the current custodian, which is me, is to understand that it's a platform for balanced and fair discussion. I hope it's a place to reflect on kind of where the country is, not just where our politics is, but where are we as a country, how we operate within the country, but also America within the rest of the world. And I'm hoping that that's a unique place for us now and into the future, because the media landscape is so immediate. It's in many cases so partisan, so fast moving. I want to preside over a discussion that is about taking stock of where we are, being a place for accountability, but being a place for fairness. And I think that there's still a great desire for that as I talk to people, because of how quickly these other events are moving. And because of, part of what's going on in the media landscape is not only a fight for survival for your attention, which is when do you want information, how do you want it, where do you get additional depth, but it's competition for kind of your soul, in the sense of, how do I kind of target you given what you believe, and then be your source of information. Now, I happen to think that's a bit dangerous. I mean, I think that, my media habits are very vast, that I'm taking in so much information because I want to wrestle with all these different issues and know the different perspectives. But we live in an age where people consume what we do to validate their views. And that's not a passing interest. I feel like it's a very intense interest, that people who think a certain way on a certain issue believe that to lose on that issue politically is very meaningful. And so there really isn't a lot of room for kind of seeing the other person's point of view. It's about winning. You've got to win. And the media is now drawn into that winning. And I think it affects us, but I do think it affects our institutions, like in Congress. I was just having lunch with a senator who was bemoaning kind of a younger generation of senators who you hear so much about, the Rand Pauls and Ted Cruz and Mike Lee and so forth, who eschew this idea of a lot of negotiation and compromise because there's such a heavy price to pay back home. And that's coloring a lot of how I think the congressman would tell you, is of how certainly the House operates, and increasingly the Senate as well. So, and there's one other remark I'd make about kind of institutions, The reason I think the economy is still such a big deal, and that's not a profound thought, but I feel like people are ever fearful and anxious about falling into lower economic classes. And that they see a failure in leadership, a failure in government to protect them against that. Or on the other side, more conservatives see it as government, basically standing in the way of their own progression in a very difficult economy. And that has very real consequences. And there are lots of people who are tapping into that. I mean, Tea Party groups, conservatives tap into that. Jon Stewart taps into that fear and anxiety, but also that real opposition and disappointment in major institutions. Again, be it Congress, be it big companies, be it the big banks, be it the broadcast television networks. I mean, we're all sort of swept up in that. So I think that's kind of the background music to what's happening here right now. I mean, the action right now is around what's going to happen in the second term, in the president's second term. Any second term is ushered in with a great sense of fanfare for all the political capital that was created because of re-election. And that's quickly tempered by how short the calendar becomes to get something done and how outside forces intervene. So the president is now, to me, the big goal is economic restoration. That's a legacy issue. It's an immediate issue in terms of what the president had to deal with when he came in, what he wants to deal with as he gets out. So if we don't deal with the budget in a wholesome way, you may never really unlock the animal spirits in the economy that can really be helpful to the economy. As I talk to people, I don't see much faith in the idea of a grand bargain. There's a lot more talking going on. There's more pockets of confidence. I just don't see an agreement over taxes. Oh, period. Somebody just expressed to me today, there's no deadline now. Nothing is going to revert to a previous tax code or taxes going up. Things are now static. And I just don't know that the president is going to win on the budget battle. So I think there's going to be some period of stasis, and we may have to wait till the next president to take on the entitlement part of the budget that's so out of control. So that's just a reality. You have the gun issue. The president has lost on that. I don't think that's coming back. I think it'll be a big 2014 issue, and we'll see how it plays. We just don't know. Immigration, there's a lot of momentum behind that. There's a lot of reasons for Republicans to want to agree to an immigration bill, as well as Democrats wanting it. But there's some skepticism now about how much they're trying to do in one bill as opposed to breaking it up. That could be an issue that fails. If that fails, here we go into the midterm race. Guns, immigration, no deal on taxes, and that's the Democratic play going into 2014. And now you're done. I mean, if the rest of this year you don't get something big done on some of these issues, then we're into an election year and all the jockeying starts taking place. And then there's Obamacare. I think a lot of people who are employees who get a paycheck, the one thing they do understand about Obamacare is that you're paying more taxes. Okay? You are paying a Medicare surtax. If you work for a company and they do the withholding, they are withholding the Medicare surtax. You are paying more taxes. You may not understand the impact of Obamacare yet, but you're paying more taxes. That's a tough place for the president to start in winning kind of the information war about what the ultimate impact is, as well as the other things that have to happen for the healthcare plan to be implemented properly and for younger people to buy into the insurance pools, et cetera. So these are the big agenda items. These are the big legacy items that the president is facing as he deals with a second term. And then there's the other things in a second term that can really sort of occupy a president's time. And to me, if you followed the Benghazi back and forth, to me there's a much bigger issue here, which is the tide of war receding or accelerating against terrorists? Is the idea that we're still sort of at war with terrorists, is that overblown, or is it accurate? And the whole fight about Libya here was an administration that decided to take Gaddafi out by being part of a coalition where the United States was really not in the lead, and the United States was not going to own Libya. And as a result of not owning it, we had a security situation which is indisputable in Benghazi, where we didn't have proper security for a diplomatic compound there. And then a terrorist attack happens, and so on and so forth. So everything about how it was described in the middle of the election and whether military assets were brought to bear or should have been brought to bear is all about how seriously this president is taking some of these accelerating terrorist threats. You see the same thing in Syria now. You see the expansion of Al-Qaeda in North Africa. So this is a big philosophical, ideological, national security fight. And the truth is that these issues are going to continue to vex the administration because they're not going away. The Middle East is chaotic, and it's in a moment's notice can immediately occupy the president's time. So that's the reality he faces when he deals with foreign affairs. Then you add to all of that. Let's kind of look at the media and the policy agenda, and then you have where are we going in our politics, and 2016 and how that's sort of shaping up. I think the really interesting story is what's going to happen on the right, and I don't think anybody really has a reliable idea. I flew down to the Bush Library last week with Jeb Bush, and he strikes me as someone who's already pretty irritated with the political class and with the news media and with the process. I mean, not that I blame him, but it's kind of soon to be that irritated with us. That usually takes, 2 or 3 more minutes of being in the process. And so I'm just not sure. He also has a son, George P., who's really going to make a mark in Texas, probably be elected land commissioner, and will run for governor, and away he goes. So he may put kind of the Bush family resources into helping his son politically, which I think is pretty interesting. What happens in terms of the right sorting itself out between the Rand Pauls and Ted Cruz's and the Tea Party and who they want to put forward as a nominee, or Marco Rubio, who could be a real hero on immigration or could really suffer politically if it goes down. That's really something that they've got to work out. What's clear is that the coalition that the president put together, young people, 18 to 34-year-olds, college-educated women particularly, and minorities. You saw the news this week about African Americans eclipsing, the percentage, historic percentage of the vote, even among white voters. That coalition is potentially quite durable. It's really quite durable, and there's every reason to believe that it could flow rather naturally to Hillary Clinton as a nominee. Now, it's always dangerous to say that this early on, but that's clearly where a lot of the thinking is going to be. Even though that might challenge some of the conventional wisdom about, you always want to look forward in elections, in presidential elections, you don't step backward. The idea that this would be groundbreaking, be the first woman president, I think could fuel a lot, would be a natural way to follow up on President Obama. I think it's going to be very difficult for Joe Biden, to win in that context, but a lot of that will turn on, I think, a key question for all Democrats, which is, was President Obama a success on the economy? And that's why I came back to what I said before, which is that's really the sweet spot right now, which is economic restoration and how the president tries to usher that in. And there'll be other players, whether it's Andrew Cuomo or Martin O'Malley, other people who will make it something of a fight in a Democratic primary. But all the money is still on Hillary Clinton and what she does if she decides to run. If she doesn't, all bets are off. But everything is sort of lined up for her pretty well. And finally, before I take your questions, I think it's always worth noting something very positive. And I think we're still fresh enough off the Bush Presidential Library that it's worth reflecting on it. I covered Bush for 8 years. So for me, going out of the library was both incredibly interesting and nostalgic. But what I really appreciated about covering the event is how rare it is to have our major political figures, individuals who have made their political livings, their political careers off of, feverishly opposing their predecessors. I mean, you would not have Barack Obama without George W. Bush. You would not have had a anti-war, liberal, Democratic president who didn't have to vote on the Iraq War had you not had George W. Bush. But the president said something that I thought was very meaningful, which is, the personal attributes about President Bush were important to extol, but he said it's a reminder to everybody that presidents do their best, that they all do their best. And in our hyper-partisan and super polarized time, I think it was a worthwhile thing to hear and have blasting across the airwaves. And I think that's true of most people who are serving in Washington. So again, thanks for having me, and I'll turn it over to you for your questions about what's happening in this fine city. Yes, sir.
I have a question. Nancy Pelosi spoke a little earlier about obstructionist politics and what's going on right now. With the Republicans and really not passing anything that the president wants to do.
Yeah.
But I wonder what your thoughts are about legacy and role of the president to be on the Hill when things aren't working, and what your thoughts are regarding it.
I don't think he's got a tremendous amount of skill when it comes to working his will through Congress. And coming up with coalitions, confusing the enemy, and all the rest. I think that's born. He's just not that kind of politician. Two, I think he recognized early on that the divide was so big that Republicans were united enough to oppose him in the way that they have. Whether it's Mitch McConnell, we're going to make him a one-term president, which is hardly unusual, but it just showed you that there was a philosophical divide that was big enough and structural changes that were durable enough, say in the House, that they were just not going to give. That's why immigration is an important test case, because it's in their mutual self-interest to arrive at some sort of deal on this. And if that doesn't pass, that tells you that there are just such deep problems, because this is an issue where Republicans have a need to court more Hispanic voters. Democrats want to represent these voters who have voted for them in large numbers. So yeah, there's no question that there have been, you've had Republicans talking about the obstruction among others in their party on issues like guns. But guns is an example too, where look what's happening in the states. Delaware now, Colorado before, they made their efforts about dealing with mental health. And at the federal level, it was again about an assault weapons ban, which has would barely survive when barely passed when Democrats controlled the House in 1994, and has not proven to be all of that successful. So I think that's part of what has made the legislative environment as difficult as it is.
So the one hope is the House, or is immigration reform and getting that to the House?
Well, I think you've got. I think right now the focus on immigration, if that can get passed, can that possibly create some momentum that extends to issues like the budget? And I do think that energy policy is one where it could really redound to the president's benefit, because it could really help the economy. If a lot of these things being on private land and so forth, that could be something that really takes off and helps the economy. Sir.
Sir, where you sit, do you think that the only issue that Congress and the president agree on are issues concerning veterans? And do they agree?
Well, given your work, you may know better. I think that certainly in principle they agree, and I think there's enormous consensus around the debt that is owed to veterans, and particularly now returning veterans who are going to have healthcare needs that are unprecedented, in the history of our warfare, that are going to require the kind of sustained resources and the public's attention beyond what I even think the public is capable of. If we can't pay attention to the fact that we were, still in Afghanistan after a decade, I think caring for our veterans is going to require a lot of private work and a lot of, interest group work to keep the attention here. I think there's enough momentum built up around some of the private sector work too that could be very promising. And one hopes that won't lose the momentum.
Questions?
Yes, sir.
In terms of energy policy and likelihood that we will see increasing amounts of oil and gas involved, so much to the tune that we may not need to court Saudi Arabia, some of Qatar and others. How do you think that will play out in terms of foreign policy?
I don't see, just when you think you're out of the Middle East, it draws you back in. I mean, I just don't know that there's any other country besides the United States that can make things happen there, or without U.S. leadership. Now, that's a different matter than, the model of having to take over a country to try to put it on a path towards stability. I do think it's a very difficult time to develop a strategic framework for how to approach the Middle East. I think that basically the administration's view is, let's see where we can make a difference, and kind of watch how this develops. Because you certainly have to watch how these countries start dealing with each other and dealing with their own sectarian conflicts and their resource issues. And you have to see how they start to deal with these things on their own. There's so much that we've already done that diminishes it's both our credibility and our effectiveness and our reach. Look what Iraq is now going through again in terms of a sectarian divide. And we'll see what the role that Iran plays in there, and then the explosion from Syria. I just don't think that the so-called pivot to Asia is realistic when only the United States is in a position to force its will. I mean, I think the question right now for the Obama administration on Syria, for instance, is who else steps up in a meaningful way to actually commit troops and to sort of own the problem.